My name's Natasha Hawker and welcome to our interview blog. This is the 7th in our series. I can't believe already, 7th or 8th. And I am thrilled to have a special guest with us today, but I wanted to share some statistics with you before we get started. The current statistics around domestic violence in Australia are truly awful. On average, one woman in Australia is murdered each week by a current or a former partner. 95% of overall perpetrators of domestic violence are male. And domestic violence impacts 1 in 6 female workers. And I'll use that word again, female workers. So these could be your co-workers. And it's a major contributor to absenteeism in the workplace. And so we are absolutely thrilled to interview today Janine Lee from Domestic Violence Business Solutions. Welcome, Janine.
Thank you, Natasha. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited about this. So let's get stuck into it because we've got some great questions, and I know that many of the people who listen to this are going to leave very educated and very inspired. So you had a 24-year history or career in the New Zealand Police Force. Tell us a little bit about your story. Did you always want to be a police officer? How did you end up specialising in domestic violence? Because I'm not sure that would have been what you thought you were going to do when you grew up.
No, domestic violence, definitely not. But, you know, Natasha, from the age of 13, I wanted to be a police officer. And it was really interesting because when I finished school, I went along to join the police and they told me to go away and get some life experience. And at the age of 17, and that was the best advice I did. So went to university, got an HR marketing degree, and then came back into the police at the age of 24. And that was the best move ever. At 17, way too young. And, you know, I spent the first 10 years of my career working on the street in various roles. And that was essentially responding to 000 calls. So it was a quick wake-up call for me in terms of the realities versus the perception of, I want to help, because everyone who wants to join the police wants to help. And of course we do, but the realities are very different to our perceptions. So look, after 10 years of working on the street, very happily, I then moved into an investigation career and I became a qualified detective and really spent the next 13 years of my career working in homicides. I worked with aggravated robberies, drugs, sexual violation cases, you name it, just lots and lots of high profile cases where we did some really great things with people to ensure their safety, and we're very clear around our investigations to get some very good results. So that was excellent. Then what I did is I moved to Wellington, having moved from the central North Island of New Zealand, and that's where I progressed with my career. I led a team, a neighbourhood policing team in one of the hardest, most challenging socio-economic small towns in Wellington, and then I moved into leading domestic violence teams as well for the Hutt Valley Police in Wellington, and after that moved into Police National Headquarters. And that was really wonderful because that gave me an opportunity to really utilise my investigation skills. I worked cross-government and became a leader and a mentor for the whole of the New Zealand Police on the National Family Violence team. And it was around operationalising policy, reviewing policies. I wrote policy whilst I was there, which was published in 2018. And that was around protecting our highest risk victims in New Zealand in relation to death and protecting them from death and in what we call New Zealand GBH, grievous bodily harm, which is the next level down from murder and manslaughter. So there was a lot of really, really amazing opportunities that we had there to make some change.
And it sounds like, you know, what I love about that, the fact that you did a HR and business degree, so, you know, that's speaking my language, but also that the police were sensible enough in their recruiting that they knew that you needed life experience, which was going to make you a better police officer. And I think that's really powerful because, you know, we've all been at times where we need to recruit, and sometimes, take people too early or whatever, but it was obviously very clearly part of their strategy that you needed life experience to be able to do your job well.
Absolutely. And, I would give the same advice again myself.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm fascinated. Tell me, and I love this question for people, what is your why? Why have you started this business? What's the reason?
My reason was a case that I worked on actually, and it was a very sobering case for me, and I'd like to share it with you. And it's how I met a lady by the name of Jane, and of course I'm not going to use her real name here for privacy reasons, but her story is very true to my heart. And I'll never forget the day when I got a call from a police officer in the middle of the night, and I was on call, and he said to me, "Jane's sitting in this phone box. She won't move, and you've got to come now. You've got to come and help her." So when I got there, I'm like, gosh, she's asking to be relocated at such short notice. How am I going to do this? And I could see that she was sitting in the phone box when I got there, and the light was shining through the phone box. And as I walked in and knelt down next to her, I could see the whites and the knuckles of her hands, as she was just wrapped them so tightly around her knees as she was sitting on the ground. And she had tears just streaming down her face, and she wouldn't talk. And so I just gently said to her, "Are you okay?" And she looked at me and she just said, "I wish I could go to the grocery store and buy just an apple or an orange, maybe even both." And then she turned to me and she looked at me and she said, "If I could choose what I want to buy, an apple or an orange, I don't know. You'd have to tell me." And this was a professional lady. She was a professional lady. She was well respected in her industry. She had children. She was really good at what she did. She had a massive income, and yet we were having this conversation in the middle of the night. And we went on to relocate her the very next day. And the most touching moment was when I heard that when she walked into her new place, her 9-year-old daughter, she fell to her knees, Natasha, on the ground, and she just said, "Mummy, I don't ever want to leave here. We're safe." And and then she went on to have this amazing business that she created in her new location. And for me, that was the tipping point. That was when I knew that I could do something more. And that's why I left the New Zealand Police, to make a bigger difference for businesses and people in Australia, because for me, enough was enough and things had to change. And I really knew I could make that difference by coming here.
And I think you can. And I think you've raised a really good point there, Janine. I think we have a horrible situation currently in Australia, and it exists in other parts of the world. And I think for a lot of times people are a little bit hands off, and I think we need a broader response. And that's across multiple levels and multiple, in terms of breadth and depth. And I think that's why I was so passionate about getting you on and letting people know about what you do, because we all have a role to play, and the workplace often is impacted that. So that's probably a great segue into, what do you actually do for your clients?
Thank you. So we work across Australia, and we're working with enterprises to create staff trust and confidence. And it's about developing more connected workplaces and creating safer families together. And that's a really, really important thing that we're trying to do. And I'm very excited because we've developed a new system to be able to do that. And I know it works because it's worked for me for my whole career. Yeah. And it's about 8 leadership steps to DV prevention through cultural change.
Excellent. And so I'm going to get into this more, but what do you see at the moment as the greatest risk for your clients in the Australian workplace in terms of where the domestic violence statistics are at the moment?
It's a really, really good question that you ask. And for me, with my observations and my skills, it's around duty of care. And it's around how we're managing those risks in the workplace. And for me, it's like, we have great procedures across the whole of Australia in terms of, if there's a fire, yes, we know what the fire drill is. We know exactly who the people are, what the wardens are, what everyone's role is, what we need to do, where we need to go. But if someone was to walk into our workplace with, for example, a firearm or a knife, what are our responses? How do we manage that? And potentially we could end up in chaos because we don't know how to respond. And they're very similar. We just need to look at what's happened in New Zealand just recently, unfortunately. And these are realities now, and we need to manage them. So what I would say is duty of care is around safety provisions that we're providing to our employees, and it's also around health and well-being as well. And so, for example, if we have an employee that wants to take or needs to take domestic and family violence leave through their normal entitlements, that's now a known risk. It's a known hazard. So are we treating it the same as any other workplace hazard?
And I think you've raised a very good point there, and we probably should have said that up front. I still think a lot of employers in Australia aren't even aware that there is domestic violence leave that is available to anyone who needs it in the workplace, and also around that duty of care responsibility, that you have a duty of care to provide a safe workplace. And we're going to get into that in a bit more detail soon. And I think, you know, one of the things that comes to mind is, I think one of the problems that we have as a workplace and as a nation and as an employer is we often only think of domestic violence in terms of when it gets physical. If somebody's been physically hit and we can see it. But there's a lot of other behaviours that constitute domestic violence. Can you share what they are?
Yes, absolutely. And this is where we can have a great opportunity to get better at recognising these things. So it's very rarely, first off, a one-off incident. The first time will be a one-off incident, but it becomes a reoccurring pattern, a reoccurring behaviour, and it's episodic in nature. So what that means is these ongoing threats of fear and harm, coercion and control, to the point where someone doesn't feel safe in their own home or in their workplace. And it presents in lots and lots of different ways. So intimidation's one. So, for example, you know, and it can come out in lots of different forms. Cell phones are often smashed, work phones. And then it's like, how do I explain this? Pets are another one where, you know, pets are harmed. Often pets are harmed, and it's so traumatic. It's around emotional abuse as well, Natasha, and it's about, you know, all the put downs. It's around, gosh, people feel like, I'm going crazy. Am I really thinking this? You know, it's playing those mind games as well. And then we're looking at things like isolation, which is a massive factor as well. And there's a lot of jealousy that's attached to that as well. So even though we may be sitting in our workplaces, for example, and there's a lot of busyness around us, but we're very isolated because we can't talk up, and there's this fear there that we might lose our jobs, or we might not be in line for the next promotion opportunity, things like that. So
there's a lot of stuff there. What can, I suppose, business owners do to protect themselves, their teams, and victims of domestic violence? What can they do to change it?
There's a lot that we can do, and what I would suggest is we start with some basic stuff. So we're getting some things right, and it's about creating safer workplaces and a safer environment. So I think that's really the first thing. And because a lot of business owners, they say to me, you know, Janine, we agree with you that domestic violence is not okay in our communities, whether it be at home, at work, in our sporting arenas, whatever. But I'm so pleased it's not happening in our workplace. And yet, you know, those statistics that you brought up before, 1 in 6 women who are working are impacted by domestic and family violence. So proportionally, when you look around us, even right now in our workplaces, where are those 1 in 6? There will be staff members sitting there. And so it's about changing our mindset that it's about recognising what it is. And often at the moment it's presenting in terms of absenteeism. It's presenting like there's poor performance happening, there's low morale, all those sorts of things.
There's
But really, when we unpack
regular excuses for different things.
that's right. And, I liken it to a leaky bucket. We're trying to plug all these holes with all these depression, anxiety, everything like that, which are very real things that are happening. But it's about looking at potentially the true causation of some of these signs and symptoms that are happening. And until we do that, they're going to continue.
So tell me, if you had a magic wand, Janine, what would you do? What would be the one thing that you would change in terms of how we approach domestic violence?
Yeah, I love this question. I absolutely love it, Natasha.
I love the magic wand.
And that magic wand, it can be so real. And this is what I think we need to be doing. It's about a multi-agency response and approach, and it's about sharing the information, sharing timely, proportionate, necessary information only to be shared. And the reason I say that is I've seen so many examples through the New Zealand Police of cases that I've worked with where our responses really impact the lives of others. And what we're tending to do is work in isolation from one another. So, for example, our GPs are seeing people come in to A&E with injuries that are domestic and family violence related. Our education system, our teachers are seeing that. We're seeing it in our workplaces. We're seeing it at home. We've got wonderful call centres there that are providing support. Our child services, and it's about everyone talking to one another, because what happens typically is when we have one small piece of information, our decision making is very limited because we can only make a decision based on that one piece. If we know the whole picture, we can put the whole puzzle together, and our responses are very, very, very different, and we can provide the proper necessary support that way.
And look, given those statistics, there is probably somebody listening to this interview blog today that might be going, well, maybe that's me, I'm experiencing it. What one piece of advice would you have for someone who either suspects or knows they're experiencing domestic violence? What can they do?
The first thing I'd say is it's different for everyone, and that's really important to understand. But safety first. Safety is a must to come first, and we must always prioritise ourselves like that. So, we know that leaving or thinking of leaving or even talking about leaving can be such a dangerous time for people, and it's about familiarising ourselves with what's actually the risk to me right now and understanding what that might look like. So when I hear people, so many people I've worked with in the past say, oh, they were really sorry. They only put their hands on my throat. And yet we know that strangulation is a lethality factor. It's something that can kill us very, very quickly and has a long-term ongoing health and wellness implications as well. So it's around knowing what your risk factors are and then telling someone you trust. That's the biggest thing, so we can get the right support.
I think the other thing that I've often found, and we've had this with, a client story that I shared with you some time ago, I think as Australians and as an employer, there's a bit of a feeling of, I don't want to be seen as interfering. That's not really my business. That's a personal domestic situation. Why and when should somebody get involved? And what's the best way of approaching someone in their team that they suspect might be in this situation? Because people are always worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. How can they do that?
Yes, absolutely. And, the first thing is that what happens at home impacts our workplace. It impacts on our sports fields. It impacts everywhere in all our communities, because we know that domestic and family violence doesn't discriminate across age, across religion, across sexual preference, across disability, across job title. It's everywhere.
Well,
absolutely everywhere. And it's about understanding and knowing that it is our business. It actually is our business, and it doesn't have to be awkward. So it's about having courageous conversations. And this doesn't have to be difficult, and it's so easy to do to take the awkwardness out of it, because it's about asking someone, are you okay? Just like I did with Jane in that story that I shared with you, sorry. You know, I didn't know her, and yet I instantly was able to develop a great rapport with her. And it's about listening without opinion. So it's not offering any judgment, it's simply listening and then offering to do something. So taking some form of action and then touching base with them again. Because the biggest thing that I find, Natasha, is people go, well, that's great, Janine, thanks. You've given me a process for having a conversation, but it didn't work. And I go, it didn't work. And it's like, well, we can't begin to disclose our biggest fears, especially if we are at risk of harm in one small conversation. So it's about building that trust and confidence, that rapport, to make it a safe space to be able to do that. So that's the touching base again.
And I imagine many victims, because of what you talked about with that isolation, their trust levels are low and they're quite terrified. So, you know, they need to develop that trust with the person who's trying to help them as well, around providing that, here's some information, would you like me to go along with you? You know, that sort of support.
Absolutely, absolutely. And coupled with that, you know, we're really scared we're going to lose our jobs.
Yes.
We're really scared because one of the many barriers to leaving is around our inability to have financial independence for many reasons. So there's this double layer or triple layer of fear that's going.
I heard a statistic, and you may be able to, I may have this wrong, but it's something along the lines of it costs on average a woman about $17,000 to leave a domestic violence situation. Do you have any view on that?
I would totally agree, because it's everything. It's across our whole lives, and it's not the biggest thing as well is that it's not just us; it's our children as well. It's our families. It's everything. So, you know, if we just even think back to when we rented a house, for example, you know, we need references to get in. We need a bond. And what happens often, a lot of the time, is there is a degree of financial control, not in all cases, but in a lot. So when we have someone, for example, who has put all the debts in our name, and so even cell phones, the mortgages in our name, and on it goes. The power and electricity is our name. And when these are not paid, these are all bad debts. We've got zero credit rating. In fact, we've got negative gearing, zero, you know, credit rating. And so there's all these prevention, you know, things there that just are not supporting us to be able to leave. So these are all the hidden costs, and it's also, you know, the health and well-being costs that come into that as well. It's massive.
And the confidence, you know, even, you know, I imagine somebody who's experienced that, their confidence has been, you know, derailed over years. And so even having the confidence that they have the ability to get up and walk away is an incredibly big task for them, I imagine.
It's huge. It's huge. And you just can't. And this is why we need someone. We need someone beside us, because that just having one person there and just being there it's about, I have the saying, everyone needs a someone.
Yeah.
It's about being a rock to that.
And I'd love to explore that a bit more, because I think even given those numbers, there are many of us who maybe know someone, man or woman, who's experiencing a domestic violence situation, whether they're a family member, a work colleague, or a friend. And I think, you know, what we often struggle with is, how do we provide that support? How do we help our friend that we love and care about leave a situation that is not a good situation for them to be in, where you have some fear for them? What could you suggest for someone in that position?
I love that, because the answer is so simple, and it's about being there for them. So it's about giving them, like we were talking about before, that safe space. And what happens is that to be able to talk and what we all want is we want the best for someone. So we want them to take action, but it's about understanding that taking that action might not be right for them right now. And there's lots of reasons for that we don't have time to go into now, and we can explore it another time. But it's around understanding that things have to happen in their time, not ours, not on our time frame. And this is why it's so important to keep touching base again, to checking back in with them. It's that building that trust and confidence to know that you're always there. You're just there. That's all you need to do, is just be there.
Just be there. I'd like to finish with one question, and I'd like to do it almost like a case study. So for a workplace that has somebody who they feel is an imminent threat of their well-being or life, and they contact you, what happens next? How do you help that business?
Okay, so what we do is we do risk assessments, individual risk assessments and safety planning. So we will work with your company to provide that safety net, that safety support for your staff member. And that needs to be done with consent in terms of how much information we share with businesses, but it's done confidentially and it's done privately, and it's around looking at how are we making that person safe. So that's the first thing we do, is the safety planning. And always what happens is the people that I'm talking to, they know what makes them safe. And it's about creating a plan that works solely for them in their time, with their consent, that they're happy with. So the next thing that we do as well is we do workplace safety plans, which are very different to individual safety plans. So it's about looking at our work, how are we keeping our staff, our employees safe in the workplace, so that, for example, if a partner was to come up to a reception area at work, how are we managing the safety responses around that, not only for the member concerned, but also for our other staff, because let's not forget them as well. It's about, these things impact other staff. It impacts on their health and well-being around what they've seen and heard, how they're having to manage that situation as well. So we look at all those things as well, and then we look at the physical workplace, do a risk assessment there as well, in terms of, for example, car park lighting. Is it safe for staff to walk to their cars at night? Do we need to look at different strategies to get them to and from work? What's preventing them from coming to work, for example? So could be transportation. Let's have a look at how we can alternatively get them to work to prevent that absenteeism from happening, and those sorts of things. So it's a physical audit of the actual workplace as well. And we also do a hotline, for a subscription-based hotline as well, for employers, just if they have questions in terms of where to from here, or what next, or a what if question.
And I think that raises a really valid point, because I shared an example with you in preparation for this around a client of ours many years ago that, rang me in an absolute panic because, one of their team members had been rather badly assaulted. And one of the other lovely team members said, well, come and live with me. But she was fearful that the girl who offered her a safe haven was quite fearful for her own safety, given the circumstances. And so it is broader than just the individual. But I also imagine that where there are workplaces that provide that safe haven and that support, that enables the individual to leave, in terms of, being able to have the financial security, the job security, the support, to be able to leave that situation.
Absolutely. And there's so many fantastic opportunities that we have in the workplace to change that. Imagine having the confidence, you talked about before, that we can give our staff members. So, for example, if their work uniform is ripped as so it prevents them from typically getting to work, let's have a spare uniform somewhere that's really in a safe place for them, so that it's not, other people are not seeing it, and we can just get them another uniform so they can still turn up and look the same as everyone else. It's those strategies that we can use. There's lots of them.
which is not complex.
No.
Last thing I want to say, you mentioned in your earlier story how you had to provide a safe house for that individual. How
Yes.
often does it move to that, actually remove them to somewhere safe where the perpetrator doesn't know where they are? How often does that happen?
It depends on the level of risk. And so there's tiers around that. So it may be that there's relocations within the same area, within the same town, within the same suburb. And then it could be from state to state, or it could be internationally even. So it will depend on the level of risk. The higher the risk, the less likely or the less numbers there are. But the other two, there's a lot. There's a lot of interstate moving around, and already I've come across a lot of it here. And it's around how we manage that in our workplaces. The costs you were talking about before, new uniforms for children, enrollments in school and so forth. And what do we do with our pets? Take them, do we leave them? So many times people haven't left because of a pet. And children, they're part of our family as well. So there's a lot of factors there.
Well, look, fascinating conversation. I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I am a huge supporter of what you're doing. I think that we need this across all businesses in Australia. We all as Australians need to step up and do something about this and help everyone play their part in changing our statistics to make them much more positive than they are now. If someone wants to get in touch with you, Janine, how do they do that?
Thank you. So my website is dvbusinesssolutions.com.au. That's the best place to get hold of me, Natasha.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best in your journey, and I can see you're going to make a great difference to many women's lives and many people's lives, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.